9. Tamara Samsonova. A Russian woman named Tamara Samsonova, nicknamed the Granny Ripper, committed an unknown number of murders during a 20-year period from 1995 to 2015. It's believed that she killed at least 13 people before finally falling under legal scrutiny for administering a fatal drug overdose to 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova. Samsonova was working as the victim's live-in caregiver at her St. Petersburg home when an argument over some dirty cups went terribly awry. When questioned by police, Samsonova admitted to mutilating Ulanova's body with a hacksaw while she was still alive. During a search of the home, police found bagged body parts and a diary containing information about some of Samsonova's previous victims, including a former tenant and a local business owner. She was ultimately linked with a dozen unsolved murders in the area and is suspected of having something to do with her husband's disappearance in 2005. His body was never found. Based on the evidence they discovered, detectives concluded that Samsonova most likely had a habit of eating some of her victims' body parts and that she seemed to have a fondness for consuming human lungs. They also found out that she had a fascination with a serial killer known as the Butcher of Rostov, who killed an estimated 50 victims within a 12-year period. According to the most recent updates from late 2015, Samsonova was deemed a danger to society and was institutionalized in a psychiatric facility while awaiting the next steps in her case. However, it's unclear what happened next. 8. Armin Mues. By all outward appearances, Armin Mues lived a normal life as a computer repair technician in Germany. But he had a secret fascination with cannibalism, and in 2001 he took his obsession to a whole new level. He searched for a willing victim who wanted to be eaten, which is apparently just as much of a fetish as the act of eating human flesh. Mues found his match on a now-defunct web forum called the Cannibal Cafe, where he posted an advertisement searching for a normally built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. Surprisingly, a lot of people responded to the ad, but a 43-year-old engineer from Berlin named Bernd Jürgen Armando Brandes was the only candidate who didn't back out. The pair met at Mues' home in the small town of Wusterfeld, where Brandes took around 20 sleeping pills. They filmed Mues consensually severing Brandes' privates before they tried to eat the appendage raw. However, it was apparently too chewy for the man, so Mues tried to fry it, but he burned it past the point of being edible. He then cut it up into pieces and fed it to his dog. By then, Brandes was extremely weak from blood loss and the sleeping pills certainly didn't help. Mues drew a bath for the man, leaving him there while he went into another room and read a Star Trek book. After some time, Mues stabbed Brandes to death and stored his body in a freezer. Over the following 10 months, he ate an estimated 44 pounds, 20 kilograms of the man's flesh. Mues was arrested in late 2002 after someone alerted authorities to some new ads he'd posted in search of victims. In 2004, he was convicted of manslaughter and received an 8.5-year prison sentence. Prosecutors appealed the verdict, arguing that Mues deserved to be convicted of murder despite the act being consensual, and in 2005 the case was retried. This time, Mues was found guilty of murder and received a life sentence behind bars. The man has since said that he regrets what he did and that he wants to write an autobiography in hopes of discouraging people with similar desires from following in his footsteps. Interestingly, after going to prison, he became a vegetarian. 7. Margler Dunski. In late 2019, a Michigan man in his early 50s named Margler Dunski met 25-year-old Kevin Bacon on a dating app called Grindr. He invited the younger man over to his home in Bennington Township for what one can only assume would be a romantic evening, or perhaps a casual encounter. Unfortunately, Bacon got much more than he bargained for, and it wasn't until he was reported missing that law enforcement and his loved ones learned of his grisly fate. Acting on a tip that Bacon might be at Lutunski's home, Michigan state troopers went to the residence. Lutunski allowed them to come inside, where they found Bacon deceased, naked, and hanging upside down. During questioning, Lutunski allegedly admitted to stabbing Bacon and slitting his throat. He then tied his victim's ankles with rope and suspended him from the ceiling before cutting off and eating certain body parts, including Bacon's privates. Authorities charged Dunski with open murder, which meant that it was up to the judge to decide whether to convict him of first or second-degree murder. After initially being found incompetent to stand trial, Dunski underwent mental health treatment and was later deemed competent. His attorney, Mary Chartier, argued that her client knowingly allowed law enforcement into his home with the victim's body in plain view, demonstrating that he was incapable of measuring the consequences of his actions. She tried to convince the jury that because of this, he did not deserve a first-degree murder conviction. However, the judge overseeing the case disagreed and convicted the man of first-degree murder, describing the killer's actions as a crime of cold calculation. For the brutal slaying of Kevin Bacon, Dunski was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 6. Dimitri Luchin. 45-year-old Olga Budanova was 24 years older than her lover, 21-year-old Dimitri Luchin. However, the Russian couple's age difference proved to be the least shocking thing about them. On International Women's Day in 2018, Luchin killed and mutilated Olga, then consumed parts of her body. It all started when Luchin visited Olga's flat in Valdai so they could celebrate the holiday with some drinks. Sometime during the visit, they began to argue, and as a result, Luchin repeatedly smashed a wine bottle over Olga's head, then dismembered her body with a meat cleaver. Using blood from her cracked skull, he drew a so-called sign of the devil on a door in the home. He also roasted the woman's brain and ate it while drinking her blood in what appeared to be a bizarre satanic ritual. Evidence revealed that Luchin had a disturbing fascination with serial killers, particularly Jeffrey Dahmer. He also reportedly admitted during questioning that he derived pleasure from inflicting unspeakable brutality on his victim. Despite his confession, he proclaimed his innocence in court in the form of a bizarre poem he read out loud to the judge. However, Luchin's words were less than persuasive and he was found guilty of murder with special cruelty. In the end, the judge overseeing the case sentenced him to 19 years in a harsh penal colony for his crime. 5. FleshEating Trio. A Brazilian man in his 50s named Jorge Beltrão Negromonte became known as the real-life Sweeney Todd in 2012 when he was arrested alongside his wife and mistress for killing and eating at least 3 women. Negromonte and his wife, Isabel Perez, along with Bruna Cristina Oliveira, were accused of posting ads for babysitting jobs to lure victims to their house, where the man killed them with a hammer or fish knife. The trio then dismembered the victims' bodies and stored the flesh in their freezer. Then, as part of a bizarre purification ritual, they would consume various pieces. Afterward, they buried the victims' bones in their backyard. The women used the leftover meat to make traditional pastries, which they sold to unsuspecting buyers on the street who had no idea they were about to consume human flesh. During questioning, Negromonte reportedly excused his crimes by essentially claiming that he was doing society a favor by ridding it of women who would otherwise give birth to future thieves and lowlives. By killing uneducated and disadvantaged women, he felt that he and his accomplices were helping to purify the world, and by eating their victims' flesh, they were cleansing themselves of the sin of murder. Thankfully, all 3 suspects were found guilty of murder and received hefty sentences, ranging from 68 to 71 years in prison. 4. Alison Thompson Weaver. Deputies from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office knew they were about to encounter a serious situation when they responded to a call about someone screaming for help in the early morning hours of September 17, 2019. After entering a 48-year-old woman's Rochester Hills apartment, they found the resident and another middle-aged woman naked and bleeding. However, they had no idea just how bizarre things would get until they questioned the victim and 44-year-old Alison Thompson Weaver, who was found hovering over her friend. Both women were reportedly in a dazed and confused state, and the victim was lying on the floor with bite marks on her face and chunks of her ear and cheek were chewed off. Deputies observed alcohol containers, marijuana, and pill bottles in the kitchen and suspected that Weaver was likely under the influence. The victim said that she'd invited Weaver over for drinks, but was put off when the woman made romantic advances towards her. She wasn't interested in her that way, but wanted to be polite, so she tried to brush the incident off. After going to bed, the victim woke up to Weaver naked and on all fours. She allegedly climbed on top of her victim and began to strangle and bite her while making animal-like movements with her head and teeth. During questioning, Weaver claimed that she and the victim were engaged in a consensual role-playing game. She said that she was pretending to be a wolf and that the victim was a vampire. But the injured party insisted that she was attacked and that Weaver tried to kill her and eat parts of her body. Consequently, Weaver was found guilty and was ordered to serve 10 to 15 years in prison. At her sentencing, she apologized for her actions and said that she wished she could take it back. In her impact statement, the victim likened the experience to a horror movie and said that she didn't think she'd be alive if the neighbor hadn't dialed 911 and law enforcement hadn't shown up when they did. 3. The Cannibal of Potsdam. A 43-year-old mechanic named Stefan Trogic looked forward to having an intimate encounter with a 40-year-old schoolteacher known only as Stefan R. The two of them had apparently met on a dating app in 2020. He took a cab to his date's apartment in Berlin's Pankow district, unaware that he had been chosen to fulfill the man's cannibalistic fantasies. During the visit, Stefan R. sedated Trogic before killing and dismembering his body. He then ate certain body parts, including the victim's privates. Trogic's roommates reported him missing several days later, but the first signs of him didn't turn up until nearly 2 months later, when his bones and body parts began to appear near Stefan R.'s apartment building. Police raided the residence and found massive amounts of a cleaning agent called sodium hydroxide, also known as lye. It's believed that the suspect may have used it in an attempt to dissolve any unwanted body parts. In his basement, police discovered traces of blood, along with a collection of knives and saws that they assume Stefan R. used on his victim. For his gruesome actions, he received a life sentence and was convicted of murder and disturbing the peace of the dead. Due to the particularly grave nature of the crime, he won't be eligible for parole after 15 years, which is customary for most serious crimes in Germany. 2. Anthony Morley. Anthony Morley's original claim to fame started in 1993 when he won the first ever Mr. Gay UK contest. He gained further popularity in 1996 when he was a contestant on the dating show God's Gift. However, his fame quickly turned to notoriety in 2008 when he was charged with the murder of Damien Oldfield, who was an audience member during the episode of God's Gift that Morley had starred in 12 years earlier. Authorities accused Morley of inviting Oldfield to his apartment in Leeds, where he killed him. The man then removed a section of his leg and attempted to cook it. Apparently, after the murder, Morley stumbled into a kebab house covered in blood during the early morning hours and asked for someone to call the police. When they arrived, Morley was charged with murder. At his trial, prosecutors accused him of having a verifiable history of being a violent drunk. In a previous incident, Morley had allegedly attacked an ex-boyfriend with a meat cleaver and threatened paramedics with an air rifle. On yet another occasion, he was accused of threatening to kill a man with his bare hands. Prosecutors painted the picture of a young man who developed vicious anger problems because he was confused over his sexuality and whose violent tendencies were exaggerated by his alcohol use. But Morley is one of many people who's experienced similar addiction and confusion, and murder is not a typical response to these struggles. He was ultimately found guilty of Oldfield's murder and received a life sentence with a minimum of 30 years. 1. Rick Gibson. Oddly enough, not all cannibals are killers. Take for example Rick Gibson, a Canadian-born artist who committed gag-worthy public acts of human consumption in the name of performance art. In 1988, Gibson ate a canapé of donated human tonsils on Walthamstow High Street in London. While the act generated plenty of controversy, England has no specific laws against cannibalism, so he didn't get in any legal trouble. Less than a year later, he returned to London, where he ate a slice of human testicle on Lewisham High Street without any repercussions. However, Canadian authorities were less tolerant of Gibson's gruesome displays. When he appeared at the Pitt International Galleries in Vancouver on July 14th of 1989, he had plans to eat another slice of human testicle. But this time, police confiscated the disturbing delicacy and charged him with publicly exhibiting a disgusting object. The charge was eventually dropped, and in September of that year, Gibson devoured the hors d'oeuvres on the steps of the Vancouver courthouse. Would you rather only eat meat for an entire year, or only eat vegetables for the rest of your life? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.